let's get started. So today we're going to focus on get what you want, how to master the key negotiation strategies and tactics. We're all negotiating all the time, but sometimes we don't know what to do, or how to do it. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on a little bit today. So as you all know, I'm a teacher. I like to always lay out the terms. So we're going to define negotiations, define what some of the strategies are. What are the tactics and gambits? Gambits is another word for tactics that people use. I'm going to leave you with a number of critical principles that will increase your effectiveness as a negotiator, and then give you some suggestions about what really counts, and that is, without practice, none of it matters. This is not the kind of thing you can do and read and know everything about it. It's about practice, and we'll actually use a great example from the Sandler sales team on how that's so critical. So let's put it in perspective. What is a negotiation? It's a process, obviously, of communication by which you try to achieve an action or an agreement by someone else. So together you're working on trying to reach an agreement. That's why it takes a minimum of two parties. It can be more. Right now we're working at a world stage, as you all know, which is what's happening with ISIS or ISIL, depending which way you call them. And you've seen yesterday what happened with Russia and Turkey, and again, negotiations to make sure that we don't accidentally slip into a war. It's a perfect example. Different people, different agendas, and what they're trying to do. Essentially, there's two parts. They want to sell or buy an idea, an object, or a service. So to use that example again, both of them are selling the other on holding off from getting belligerent if they think their airspace is being invaded or where they're going on it, and trying to avoid what could lead to an escalation of warfare. So it's the idea of what to do, how to do it, that's the first step. And then the second is exchanging, a trading of a value for a value. So when you buy something, you're getting what it is you're looking for. Let's assume real estate, and what you're trading off is money. In this case, people are trading off their rights for against security. We're seeing that also right now on the world stage, and I'm really trying to give you a wider range of ways of looking at this so you really see it in terms of people wanting to be safe, but also wanting to have their privacy. But if we're going to find out who are the particular bad people, so to speak, that could create terror for us, then the answer is we need to maybe open up new channels for information, hence privacy gets invaded. So again, it's an exchange of a value for a value. The Harvard Business School, which focuses on Harvard negotiations, talks about win-win all the time. It's a great way to look at it, because if both parties win, they'll be pretty satisfied with what's going on. However, not everything is a win-win, and you should always remember that. We will get back to that at the end. So the best deals are collaborative win-win, because what's happening is each party is channeling all their energy into finding a solution that they think can work for them, and that the other party then can also try to make work. So it's 1 and 1 equals 2, rather than somebody trying to have a 1 versus 0, meaning beating or reacting to the other party. And what's real important to understand is very rarely are in the larger stage, such as peace and war, are these kinds of negotiations only focusing on one thing at one time. Instead, what they're usually doing is they're focusing on the opportunity to work together in the long run. Hence, you facilitate future deals by taking into account how you create win-win. However, for most of us, if we go to a shuk or a market and we're buying, the odds of going back there, especially if you're a tourist, isn't going to happen again. And therefore, it is possible to take a non-win-win, and that's where it works there as well. So let's differentiate then the concept of selling and buying from negotiation. Selling and buying starts earlier, okay? It's the process of persuading someone. So you're first persuading them to do the deal, and then you're working out with the exchange the parts of the deal that you're trying to make work for each side. 3 components to keep in mind again. You're going to present things logically, because that's a man's bias. We try to think in terms of being rational and logical, and it's what we want to do. But the reality of the situation is that it's emotion. Judge Frank in the 1930s wrote about how he makes decisions, and made a comment that basically said, I rationalize how my emotions felt. In other words, if I feel he's guilty, I try to find that part of law that's going to substantiate where I want to go. And I think that's what happens. If we don't like a person, even if logically we should do the deal, we may not do it. And finally, for some of us, we're in a position where power makes a difference. Clearly, the world stage is changing right now. When we had 20 years ago, 15 years ago, one superpower had a lot of power, and people listened and cared about what they were going to do. But as our government has decided to lead from behind, we've given up that power, trying to decentralize it to other people. But by disseminating it to other people have it, we've lost power, and that vacuum gets filled. And I think that's the key thing you should always remember. There is a power dimension, just like logic and emotion, in everyone. Someone's going to have it. Just how much they have versus how much the other one has is what's determined by the nature of the relationship. So if you're bellicose and very loud and you're going to dominate the attention, you have the power. But if people tune you off, close your ears, they're not paying attention to you, there's no power in that. So it's a function of the relationship. How much of each of those is relevant to each case? It depends. It depends on the interests of the parties. If they really want to do a deal, and especially if it's somewhat technical and they don't have any specific interests about the party, it's going to be more rational. If, on the other hand, there's a history, think of two people getting a divorce, then there's a relationship that's built around emotion, which is the trigger usually for that, and therefore emotion will play a larger part. And finally, the setting for every negotiation is very important as well because it gives one party possibly home court advantage. So, for example, if you think of sports, most teams would rather play in their home court because the cheering, the enthusiasm, etc., is all a home court advantage to the home team. Similarly, in the negotiations, you want to make sure that you're not giving the other party that negotiation advantage. The exchange that takes place now is a function of the values that you're trading back and forth. And the key here is to really recognize what are all of them. So in a typical transaction, you're going to buy something, money obviously is there. But time is also an issue, especially in today's day and age. Time has become more valuable. That's why today we are more likely than ever before to say we want delivery. Think of Amazon offering Prime 1 hour delivery, etc. And this whole movement to 1 hour delivery is that for most people ordering at the last minute because we're all kind of overworked and getting it delivered as fast as possible is worth more than the few dollars that it's costing. So money is losing its value against time if we watch that general trend taking place in our society. What we're also looking at is the products and services that are in the negotiation. So it might be, again, a house or a condo or a car or whatever the case may be. And it's also the creativity that's involved because creatively you bring those products in. So, for example, if you are buying, just to give an example, if you've created a new show and you've shown it on television and it's been successful, think Seinfeld or Friends, for example, and later on you want to sell it into syndication, then creatively you can decide how you want to do that. Is it 1 year? Is it multiple years? Is it some shows? Is it all shows? The creativity decides which of those products and services you want to look at, and that's where you can, what we call, expand the table, add more value by offering different products, and that gives you a chance to do different things. The volume, as I said, will be an area. How many of these things you're buying and selling? So that's why very often someone will come in and say, "What does the argument say? What does a suit cost?" If you go to Men's Warehouse, it's $3.99. What do two cost? $3.99. Buy one get the second free. They took over Joseph A. Banks. They had a deal where if you buy one suit for $4.99, you got two thrown in. So volume can be part of that deal. And finally, the relationships. The relationships that the parties have with each other is a critical part of what you're trading. Because again, if it's just one-time event, I'm going to negotiate differently than if I know I'm going to work with you in the future and I want to be able to maintain that relationship so it's easier to negotiate in the future. What are the results? Well, first of all, you have to remember we go in at many different levels. Whatever it is, I want to buy a house, I want to buy a car, I want to buy a pair of glasses, whatever the case may be. That's my initial objective. When I go in to buy it, I'm also going to size up what my the variables are: money, time, etc. I'm going to size up what that means for you. So I'm looking at both sides of the table, and very often the results are finding a way to get a better deal. How can I do that? And you have to make a decision in doing that. Are you compromising your standard, or are you making a concession to what you're doing, or not? If you're making a concession or a compromise, you probably can't go back on it. If you're expanding the table, putting more things on the table so that you can negotiate, then you can do more. Let's take another war example, by the way, so you get a feeling for it. In 1962, many of you have read about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, the Soviet Union in those days was putting missiles in Cuba that were aimed at the United States, and John F. Kennedy had to stop that, having screwed up the Bay of Pigs invasion. He played this one very differently, came up with a third alternative to just walking away a war, and we created an embargo. But what we didn't know for another 5 years is part of the deal was expanding something on the table that was invisible, and that was taking our missiles out of Turkey at that time, where Russia was very concerned, and it had actually been the trigger for why they wanted missiles in Cuba. Sometimes you can't reach a decision of where you're going, and that's called an impasse or a deadlock, where you really can't figure out what to do. And that will happen in politics very often. At this moment, at least, we're at an impasse or a deadlock with the Soviet Union. I'm sorry, with Russia, in terms of what to do in Syria, because Russia wants to keep Assad in power, America doesn't. So there's no ability to work together on ISIL. Again, a lose-lose proposition until we figure that one out. So what's the key lesson that you have to walk into when you start thinking about, I need to negotiate a deal, whether it's a salary increase, whether it's a relationship? It's always going to be the same thing. A failure to plan generally will produce a plan that failed. So you need to do your homework, and that's the reason we're doing this course today. So let's focus on the key things you need to know: the power of knowledge and persuasion. So I'm going to walk you through 6 different rules to help you go through that. Number 1 is know yourself. Remember, if there's at least 2 parties, you need to know yourself very carefully. What is it you really want? So if you're buying a car, and you were originally thinking you wanted only a brand new car, but you don't have the money for it. Now you're thinking, well, maybe I'll buy a somewhat used car that's a little cheaper than a new car, but not very old. Again, you need to be able to go through your range of what you're looking for and being able to articulate what it is you want so you know when to negotiate. What are you willing to trade? So if someone says, well, if you buy instead of the 2015 car now and save $6,000 over the 2016 cars that are now available, you're getting a year-old car, and is that $6,000 price difference equal to, greater than, or less than the resale value when you want to sell both cars 3 years from now? That's the kind of question you have to think through. In negotiation, you always have an option, and that's to walk away. I'm not going to do the deal. And so the goal of a negotiation essentially is to find the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, you want to know, where am I willing to do a deal? That's my best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And where is it not? In other words, if you want to buy my car for less than it's worth to me, that's below what I'm going to do. Therefore, I will not do a deal. There will be no negotiated agreement. And so you need to always say, where's my bottom line? Where's my walk away point? And that's your bottom, knowing what you're willing to pay and what you're not willing to pay. That means something very important. You need to start thinking, what's our zone of probable agreement? What are we willing to do? Where are you willing to make some concessions? Where is the other party likely to do that? So, for example, if I want to rent an apartment and that apartment's $3,000 right now from the landlord, and I wanted to pay only $2,200, our zone is between $2,200 and $3,000, and we can negotiate in between them. And how do we do that? Well, we have to understand all of the issues, the parties, what they each want, and the process. And so that's what we're going to do. So you start off with yourself. I know I wanted to pay 22, but if I really like this apartment, maybe I'll pay more. Maybe I'll pay 25, but I don't have 3,000. So that's beyond where I want to go. Know yourself. The second part's to know the other party. The other party is looking at it's the landlord, and what does he want? He wants $3,000. What's he willing to trade to get that? Well, maybe he'll give you a renewal for 1 year or 2 years. Maybe he'll throw in electricity. Maybe he'll throw in internet. What is he willing to trade in exchange for getting your deal? Because he needs 3,000. Now you may not know that, and that's what's important about knowing the other side. Is he may be in a position where this apartment was selling for 3,500. He has already dropped it to 3,000, and his team has said you cannot come in below $3,000. So your offer to bring it between 22 and 25 is just not on the table right now. So you need to know it's his working. So you may walk away because if he says insisting on 3,000, he may walk away if you're insisting on no more than 2,500. And that's where that zone now is narrowed, but you're not the only to do it. What's his walk away? I recently was working with a client who was negotiating a deal, and he had a great product selling for about $150, $200 each, and he offered the distributor 40% on it. The distributor came back and said, we can't do the deal because our rules call for 50% or no deal at all. But he said, understand something. Normally what you do is you have inventory products that take room on the shelf and sell for $5 to $10. I'm offering you a $150 product that has no inventory, takes up no shelf space. So if you think about it, you can make a lot more money from this. And again, what was his walkaway point, his bottom? He would love to do the deal, but because he works for a larger corporate entity and that's how they do it, they don't care about the inventory. They don't care about the fact that it's going to bring in more money dollar wise. They're only concerned with that margin, and therefore 40% of $150, despite the fact that it's so much more and so much more profitable, wouldn't work with them. So you need to know what's the range, what's the walkaway point, what's the best alternative that we can get. And then what you need to do is see how they look at the same issue you're doing. What are our issues? What are the parties? Who are you? What's your issue? And what's the process? So again, both of you have to do it, and both of you have to do a pretty good job of sizing up the other people. So one of the rules that we have is before you go into negotiation, take a look at what the other party's interests are, not just what they say they are, but what they really are, and try to figure out what they've done in the past in a similar situation, because that'll tell you a whole lot about it. At that point, you want to start shaping the game and try to think of this as a real game, like chess. Okay, you're trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. So, what issues are you really discussing, and in what order? Now, again, that's a tactical thing. One tactic is to take the biggest, most difficult issue and deal with it up front. And if you can get agreement on that, the rest falls in line. However, since the odds are that the first one, if it's so big, is something controversial and may not lead to success, what many people do is they feel, let's start with smaller issues, get agreement little by little by little by little. So when we get the big issue, we'll be more amenable, more trusting, as we'll see that's a real issue, trust, to say, let's see if we can't figure out a solution that works for both of us. You also want to take a look at who's allowed at the table. I mean, it's a metaphor table, but the negotiation, who's there? So when I do my training programs, very often, what I'll do, especially in the MBA programs where I teach this, I will actually say to them they need to negotiate where they negotiate and have someone else accompany them, and then they have to be in a separate situation where they're helping someone else negotiate that their deal, and my student's job is to be able to be an advisor and to see the process, and they're always amazed at seeing what the difference is whether you're an actor or an observer, and who you're bringing at the table will make a difference. You want to control that setting, and that means really the time. And we believe in what's called the 4D negotiation. So it's 3D in terms of the three physical attributes of space, but the fourth one's time is the dimension. Pauses and breaks work to your benefit sometimes, and sometimes will work against you. So it's the space, it's the location, and props, using props in there to be able to make your point. Keep in mind that first impressions make a very important have a very important impact, and the first offer generally sets an anchor. It says what to do. So one of the tactics that many people work with is not to make the first offer, let the other party make the first offer so that you can react. That generally was very successful if you have no idea where you're going. But if you have an idea where you're going, then going first allows you to anchor and set up a value. So you can set up a very high value in what you're doing. You want to focus on location, as I mentioned. Are you focusing on the location of the buyer or the seller? I sit down very often, for example, if you're doing a deal to do a mortgage, it's usually going to be at the real estate firm or the mortgage banker's firm, because what happens is they want to be in control. Where you sit makes a difference in terms of the table. Are you at the head of the table, on the side of the table? What's your body language tell us? What's your dress do? All of that makes a very large difference and are all variables that help you shape the game. And so you can walk in and increase the odds of success substantially by knowing how to use those invisible elements. Try to understand that negotiation is a process. It's not an event. So it's planning before you get there, playing the game, and then as you're going through the game, making sure you're working in an order that's going to work to your benefit in what you're trying to do. More and more as negotiations get complex, one of the things we discover is the way to get what you want, to work with your partner and succeed, is to really understand what lies beyond the predictable transaction. So if it's not just I'm at a shook and I want to order something, I'll buy a handbag, and what am I willing to pay? And you want $100 and I think it's worth 10, and I offer you 5, and we negotiate, and you come down eventually to 11. And I say, fine, I'm willing to pay that extra dollar just so I don't have to go look anywhere extra. And that's the answer. You're limited in what you're doing because it's a one-time event. But if you know that there are other issues that you can add to the table, like I just added more time for a second negotiation, the amount of other places where I could be buying that bag, the need for a bag, what's unique about the bag, all of those issues will affect that predictable transaction. But if you go beyond it and realize, you know something, if I like this, I may buy more, because you're thinking of going into the business of actually selling more and more bags and maybe opening up a boutique or offering it on Etsy or putting it on eBay or something like that, you want to look at what other issues that you want to add to the equation. So you need to ask the question, what other issues can you add? What other issues can the other party add? So again, I used the example before of a lease. Is it a 1-year lease, a 2-year lease, a 3-year lease? Is painting included every couple of years, just at the beginning? Are the utilities, internet, things like that added? All of those are issues you can add, and the more creative you are, the more you can find a deal that really works. Sometimes the way to do a deal is through what's called a contingency contract. If you do this, then we'll do that. If it doesn't work out this way, then we don't do that. That very often helps create a win-win situation, and that merely goes to the point about why are we being creative. We want an optimal solution, because if it's going to be a long-time relationship, as it might be between a landlord and a tenant, what you want to do is do something that's going to maintain a positive relationship for future negotiations. There are many different persuasion strategies, and increasingly we're learning the power of influence as a technique, a psychological technique, to make a very large difference. Robert Cialdini is now probably one of the leading psychologists in this area, and he focuses in on teaching different strategies to persuade people. These are some of the bigger ones, and I'm just going to go through a few of them. Again, in a normal workshop that I do or a keynote, you'd be learning more about it. But these are key persuasion strategies, and I highly recommend, if you have the time, to read his book on influence, and there's a number of others, but his is very good. He actually walks it through and he shows you how to do it. You might also go to his website and follow it. I'm a social psychologist, and I've had the privilege to work with Stan Milgram and a lot of other people on influence, and so it's nice to see people who are working specifically in this area right now. So reciprocity is an example. In reciprocity, the philosophy is you first give and then you receive. Why? Because it sets the anchor, it sets the tone. As an example, for those of you who may remember, years ago there was a group called the Hare Krishna. They're still around, but they were very, very prominent in those years, and they try to stop people in the middle of airports and streets trying to collect money. And then someone picked up on the same concept of reciprocity, and they changed their strategy. They would stop you in the middle of a street or in an airport as you landed and welcome you and give you a rose. And then as you took it and there was no obligation to do anything extra, and they asked, why you're doing this, because you're trying to spread goodwill, and that's what it's about, and you're out there collecting money, the person says, well, you gave me something, I need to give you something, and the net result is they generated 4 times the revenue that they got when they didn't do it. Social proof is because we look at the world and we're not sure of what we're doing. And so what we do is we look to other people and follow. So it's the kind of thing, if you're walking down the street and you see everyone's head looking up at the top of a building, you'll stop for a minute and do the same thing. Something must be happening, or why else would they all be looking? Third party credibility, you will know what that is, testimonials that you can use in your brochure, in your presentation to show why you're offering such high value to what you're doing. Consistency influences you. A person who's consistent all the time, honest, trustworthy, etc., will influence you whether you want to work with that person again. But by the same standard, contrast is important. So if a person generally is truthful and consistently does the right thing for people, but in 1 or 2 situations doesn't do it, that contrast stands out, and you begin to wonder what is happening in those situations. We're all used to this scarcity principle. We're going to actually watch this a little bit now between Thanksgiving, which is tomorrow, and Black Friday through Christmas, that there's all going to be kind of discounts, but then at the end, as the discounts as it becomes more and more scarce, people are going to be able to suddenly raise their prices if they want to, or limit when it's available and get more people to do it. Think about all of those Black Friday special offers from 4 in the morning to 8 in the morning. There's only 100 of XYZ, some widget that's available, and you get a special 30% off if you're online, and you get it again, and people stand online for hours. Reverse risk. It's a strategy that's being used where you're basically saying there's no risk on your part. If you take it, you don't like it, you can return it, and there's no obligation. A classic story on that is people who have ponies and want to get people in the country to buy them for their children. What they'll do very often is they'll say, listen, if you'd like to show your daughter or son what it's like to have a pony, I will give you a pony, and you can keep the pony for 2 weeks, 4 weeks for free. We'll even provide you with the food sometimes. And then at the end, if you don't like it, you can return it. And obviously, it's a very successful strategy because there's no risk on the father or mother who's taking on the animal. But at the end, when it comes to giving back the animal, the son or daughter don't want to do that. Therefore, they win. And the final one is loss aversion versus gain attainment. This was, for those of you who are familiar with Kahneman and Tversky, who won the 1996 Economics Nobel Prize for actually behavioral economics, which really is psychology. And they basically did a number of studies, and they discovered something very interesting. People would rather avoid a loss than struggle to get a gain. So how you present things, don't be the only one in class to lose this, is going to be more powerful than if you do this, you could win. So again, these are all strategies that we can use to win our thing. Within those strategies, which apply into lots of situations, are specific tactics we can use. And these are just some of the tactics, and I'll just mention a few again. So for example, higher authority is you're going to buy a car at a car dealer, and you want a better price, and the dealer says, I can't really do it. Well, I don't know, let me go ask my boss. And then he runs to a room in the back, comes back about 15 minutes later and says, for a really wonderful opportunity, the guy just, the kid just did great, the wife just did great, so he's giving you a special break, you never got it before. That's an appeal to higher authority. In this case, there's usually no boss. Good cop, bad cop, we all know that from watching television. One of them is beating up on you. The other one is saying, listen, if you just talk to me and tell me, I'll make it easier on you, etc. The foot in the door and the door in the face are two opposites, how you get people to agree. One of the foot in the door is you give someone a sample. They like it. They'll come back for more. The other one is you just come in, and because now you've grabbed their attention and it's large, they're more likely to go along. I work with a lot of investor relations companies, public companies trying to raise money from investors to grow their company. And one of our strategies always is to get players to take a nibble, because once they take a nibble and see the positive results, they come back. Strawman argument's not what it's about. It's a distract you, trial close. You get someone to a close so they feel comfortable with the concept before you actually go for the final close. We've all seen lowballing. The $100 product is only $10, except, and then we accept gives with the rest of the prices. Maybe it's $10 a month for a whole year as opposed to $100 for the year. We set deadlines, and flinching to get people to do things. And flinching is where you're emotionally trying to show someone you've got to be kidding. You don't even have to say anything, and people then have to justify themselves, and becomes a very powerful tactic. Again, you can read about these things or come to one of our programs and we'll teach them to you. Each one works in a different situation. The goal is to understand them. And in doing that, you want to really play with these eight different variables, because this is the key to increasing effectiveness. It's one, starting off with the right information. You need to know what you need to know about yourself, and you need to know what you need to know about the other person. Do you have the information that you need? If you don't, you're at a weakness. Second is, when you're going in, be an expert. Okay, you have to be accurate. So very often you'll sit down there and you'll make comments that just are wrong or look bad or whatever. Right now we have a presidential series, actually, of presidential candidates that are telling us, quote unquote, the facts, and they're not the facts. And we're all getting that. And it's unusual, in my opinion, because in most of the campaigns I've never seen this before, where people are just going, it's okay even if they're wrong. Usually in the past, fact finding meant if they're wrong, what does that tell you about their honesty, their credibility, and clearly their expertise? Credibility, do you mean what you say? Again, that consistency variable is important. Trust. Do you trust the person? Can you rely on the other's integrity? This is, for long-term relationships, the most important thing. And it's the one thing that you want to build as it goes along. I've mentioned about the importance of the actual transactional space, the location. You want to control the time and the place. So very often I will make a decision with a group where I want to do the negotiation and what time of day I want to do it. All of which are variables that, knowing the players, can make a difference in how they're going to succeed. You want to know the personality. You want to always empathize with the situation and not criticize, because all you're doing then is creating an obstacle to that win-win possibility that you want to get. You want to focus on the difference between power and authority. Okay, authority comes with your role. It's a perceived power to make decisions because you're in the role. You're the president, you're the CEO, you're the managing director. But as the movie and play 9 to 5 demonstrated, it wasn't the CEOs and this chief executives within the different divisions that knew anything. It was actually the secretaries, we call them today executive assistants, that really ran the place, and they had the power. And that's why we often talk about the informal communication channels. That's where the power is. And finally, you want to reward someone. You want to hold a person accountable for their decisions. And if they do something right, reward them, because that encourages them to move forward with you the next time. So what are the key rules that I think you need to remember that will guide everything you're doing in small ways? So these are very much tactics, but they're more rules than a tactic, because they don't apply to you, to someone else. It's mostly about yourself. One is, don't negotiate against yourself. So when you come in and you offer a price and somebody says to you, too much, too little, can't do, you got to do better than that, you're now negotiating against yourself if you give a second offer. So instead of $100, now you drop it to $80. You've just negotiated against yourself. One of the key rules is you never give without receiving. So when the person says to you, it's too much, you have to understand why. That gives you some room to maneuver in. You want to try to avoid a single issue. Well, what if you had also thrown in X, Y, and Z? How would that make a difference? And therefore, what happens is, within that, you can go ahead and say, okay, I'm willing to give you this to do that. So for $80, you'll get one meal, but you won't get the free wine thrown in. The bottle of wine that we were going to give you doesn't come with that. So now you've done an exchange. What you want to do is keep in mind that generally the person who first starts with an offer will lose unless it's being used for anchoring. That would be the change where it doesn't, because the anchor then has a value in doing that itself. You always want to try to match the needs with the objectives. So again, if someone's trying to show you an apartment and asking for $3,000, but doesn't care if he rents it or not because he's really not interested in renting it to you, and that's why it doesn't mind the fact that it's $1,000 overpriced, you need to understand that. I mentioned before to you that time is a variable. So if you're in a communication and you're stuck, saying nothing is a form of communication. It says, I'm not happy, but I don't have a better answer. And it buys you time to do the thinking. And it's very important. If someone ever uses tactics on you, such as the good cop, bad cop, or higher authority, or any of the ones we mentioned before, the most effective way of responding to that, which is why I mentioned this over here, is just label that and say, you're using the good cop, bad cop principle. I got that. And that stops them dead in the tracks, because now they understand you're as sophisticated as they are. As I said to you, we like to think we're rational, and we make our decisions not just on logic but also on emotion. But what's really important to understand is that we're not always rational, even if we try to. For example, we all have blind spots. We don't see things the way other people see them. And those blind spots are very important to understand, which is why when I have strong negotiation problems, what I'll do in those kind of challenging situations is I make sure I've structured the time and I've structured the place, and I've maybe brought in a couple of advisors so they could look at it from a different perspective and help me make sure I'm covering all the things. Because if you really want something that's a blind spot, you're going to miss all the other stuff. We need to understand how we make decisions, in other words. One of the ways to do that is to understand what are called attribution biases. In other words, every one of us makes decisions about other people and ourselves based on our attribution of cause. We like to think people cause things, create things, and how we allocate that. What we've discovered, and I'm an attribution theorist, is that what people do is they look at observers and actors differently. When we look at other people and we see them do something, an example, somebody comes to you and says, listen, I'm looking for some charitable contributions, let's say the March of Dime, would you give? The person says, oh, yes, I'll be glad to give you. Here's $100. You might look at that person and say, wow, that person who believes in the March of Dimes, because in the past, I know that person has been giving anything. It's an inconsistent behavior. That's a lot of money for that person. So that person must really believe in the March of Dimes. Whereas the observer, that's what the observer says. The actor, on the other hand, saying, well, I have made a commitment this month to give charity for $100 to whoever's next, and instead of giving it like I normally do, 425, so I'm just going to give 100, and I'm finished with it, and that was the reason to do it. Again, March of Dimes was not the relevant element in this equation. So we attribute based on biases of who we are and how we see the world and how we try to explain what we're doing. Culture does the same thing. Remember, in the Japanese culture and other cultures from Asia, the saving face is a very important thing. A little less here in America, but it's an issue. Is there ethics? Keep in mind the fact that we like to think we're open and honest. The reality of it is there are people who lie and deceive and will consistently do that. So you need to be open to that possibility. You can never outdo a liar if they're really good at what they're doing, if that's not your backbone and your strength. Keep in mind that anger has an effect. When we're angry, we're going to be less rational. When someone else is angry, we are threatened and we're reacting to it. And again, we're not going to be focused on the logic and the emotion. The logic of it, we're getting emotional. So with this overview that I've given you of strategies, principles, tactics, you really have a lot to work with. You can understand how it makes a difference in what you're doing. All of us negotiate, whether it's negotiating a grade in school, negotiating Christmas presents for those of you getting ready to do that, negotiating cars, rentals of apartments, buying things, etc. All of this. How do you get good at this? And the answer is deliberate practice. You've really got to practice and understand that practice doesn't make perfect. What really makes perfect is deliberate practice, okay, or perfect practice makes perfect. We have to really practice what we do really well. We now know the 10,000 hour concept. The talent is overrated. What it is all about is practice, practice, And after 10,000 hours, get to be really good at it. And that's it. So it's consistent, intensive rehearsing of the best practices we can do. That's what makes us good. And negotiation is no different. It is a skill that can be polished and developed and make you better at it. The key for you then is to try to harness the experience. One of the three, since we run workshops and I do keynotes on this, etc., is because as David Sandler said in a book, you can't learn to ride a bike in a seminar. And I think it's such a great quote because it makes the point. Learning to ride a bike isn't just the physical exercise of moving your legs. It's understanding the concept of balance. It's having faith in yourself. It's understanding how inertia affects you. And it's if you're a child, it's falling. It's learning that you can fall and get up and go live to another day. And until you do that, you don't really have the confidence you need. So riding a bike is about confidence, okay? It's about understanding balance. It's understanding motion. And it's understanding that you can fall and get up. And all of that only comes from harnessing the experience. And so one of the things to do if you're going to negotiate deals is to bring in someone to do that and to take a look at it. I give you one example. I worked with a company once that was developing a technology for Lucent, and it is a company technology leader in a different country, and things were going really bad, and I got a call from our client saying that Lucent wanted to have a phone call, and they were going to get the lawyers to now file suit because they hadn't delivered on time. Would I please listen in and try to give them a recommendation of what to do? I listen in on the conversation, and within maybe 10, 15 minutes, it's very clear to me what's happening, and he gets lucky. We lose phone connections. So as everyone tries to reestablish phone connections, he calls me first and says, "What do you think?" And I said, "I want you to listen and listen carefully because we don't have a lot of time. They do not want us to get the lawyers after you. They have no interest in suing you, this client. She wants a deal. She wants to do the deal with you, but she's not getting you to give her the time and attention she feels. And therefore, she's getting pressure internally to have these lawyers do it. Remember, it doesn't cost them anything because Lucent pays these guys whether they sue you or don't sue you. So my recommendation is when you get on the phone, you say, listen, how about I bring my R&D team with me? We come to New Jersey. We have a meeting. We'll talk about it. We'll lay out a schedule and figure out a solution to this. He did. She loved the idea. They came. I was part of the coaching there for that final part to make sure it worked well. And when we walked away, actually, within 1 hour of the meeting, she dismissed all the lawyers and said, "You can leave now because I think we can work this thing out." A couple hours later, we had a new agreement that was in place and everything. And it's a perfect example. It's important to get a coach who can focus on the strategy and tactics to make sure you're able to do what you need to do. So in sum, let's try to put this all together. If you want to win, you got to plan. And that means you have to be prepared. You have to understand your side, their side. You have to be able to understand what your issue is, what your bond is, where you willing to walk away if it doesn't make sense. Figure out creatively what else you can add to the table where it's relevant, and then take control of the setting. So in the case I gave you a few minutes ago, the suggestion was get off the telephone and meet face to face so you can build trust. You control the agenda. Do you want to start off with the toughest issue or work up to the toughest issue? You want to focus on what's the logic of this argument in terms of persuading people and then negotiating and exchanging. The emotion of it, does one of you have more power or the other? What additional values can you bring into exchange? That's really very key. So, for example, companies that want to syndicate TV shows for a longer period of time have to also understand that if they want to do that, the value of the commercials, if you've seen the same show 40 times on TV, is going to be lower. So where's the real point of trade-off? And understanding that allows you to make an exchange that makes sense. If it's a party that you think you can work with in the future, view it as a collaborative deal rather than competing one another. And then you'll be able to not just get this deal done, but maybe future deals done that might even be better than this one is. And when you finish, no matter what it is, no one's going to be perfectly happy. Everybody's going to feel, I got some, but I didn't get something. That's what makes it a good deal. Because usually, if one party gets everything and the other one doesn't, there could be buyer's remorse. There could be all kinds of problems. But if there's a point which everyone feels, it wasn't perfect, but everyone's walking away pretty satisfied, that sets up a basis for the next presentation, and that's what next negotiation, and that's what you want to be able to negotiate positively in the future. And with that, I want to thank you very much for coming for today's presentation on negotiations, because it is a critical part of our personal and professional lives. And you can see from today's conversation, there's lots of stuff that's going on in here. You have my email at jerryconpresentationexcellencegroup.com. If you haven't gone to our website, please do. We put a really interesting blog on lots of topics on. Once a week, there's an article. You can learn a lot. You can learn about our stuff on strategy, leadership, and a number of other topics. And actually, we'll be launching some new stuff coming up. Again, I want to also invite you to come back next Wednesday, same time, same station, for our presentation on exponential thinking and 10x growth. Learn why Airbnb and Uber and all these companies are doing as well as they are, and what are the principles they're using so that you can apply it in your companies too. And keep focusing on what we're doing beyond that for commanding strategies for a sustainable competitive advantage, and then helping next gen leaders, which is our final one on December 16th, gain mastery over tomorrow's challenges. So that's the coming lineup. We look forward to seeing you at those, and feel free, again, as I said, to